Good evening. Welcome to this episode of Paranormal Lens. I'm Jamie Widener. I'll be your host tonight, along with Chad Thomas, our co-host tonight. Hey, Chad. What's the haps?
I don't know, Jamie. What's up with you?
Oh, I'm a little punchy. Lack of sleep for a couple days and a busy schedule, just makes for like a little bleedy-eyed. I hope I can read this without having to pull out the old man glasses again that I'm going to do tonight. But, stuff's happening. So it's the last week of January. It means we have 2 months of winter left. On that. Groundhog Day is Friday. So
where's the time going?
Right. Well, it goes. It always goes. And hopefully we're having fun while we're doing stuff. So what about you? What's going on?
Let's see. This past weekend, I went to a. I saw John Stillman, who is a psychic medium. He was doing a gallery reading, which was sort of cool. He does this thing where the Thursday before his events, he goes through the papers and picks out different things that he's called to. And then during the readings, he's like, I'm looking for somebody who ties to these 7 things. And he reads these lists of things. And he said, it never fails that I can always find somebody who's tied to most, if not all of them. And it's like, somebody by the name of Albert, and somebody who was in the server, like things, and there's always like a weird one that just doesn't, like, how is somebody going to tie into that? And lo and behold, he had 5 lists and he had 5 people who he tied into, and like some really good readings. It was amazing. It's always amazing. The whole medium connection thing just interests me so much, which is why I'm excited about next week with John Covey coming on.
Absolutely.
So that was an interesting. So bird ties to both of those. But anyway, it was really interesting, and so that was fun. And then I got my Clifton trip coming up this weekend. 2 days in a theater with spirits. It'll be a lot of fun.
And all the popcorn you can eat.
Yeah, I didn't even think about that.
Bam.
Well, and that's a theater where we had some good experiences.
Oh, we had some great experiences there. I'm a
really
little jealous. I'm a little jealous of this one, but that's going to be a great trip. I'm excited for you. Obviously, we're going to have to talk about that next week. So those who don't know, the Clifton Theater, Clifton 5, is, and we did an episode way back. Gosh, how long ago was that? Like maybe the episode 6 or something.
That was like
5,
April.
6. Yeah. Like a lifetime ago. But we went out and did an investigation as Jott-Nyx, paranormal. Took a few friends along, Chris Mindens and Chris Hammond. Both went along with the Lynches, Burton, Heather, and I think that was everybody. And then most of our team had a really interesting night. Chad and I were partnered most of the evening, had some really great activity in a couple of the theaters using the tripwires, a short set and a long set running down theater 3 or 4, I forget which one, but one of the side theaters to the right as you enter. And had some great activity and some great call response activity on those tripwires, and some other interesting things in the large theater, which I think is 2. Some stuff upstairs as well. So it's a really cool spot. If anybody gets a chance to get out there, you can usually do a dip with them where you get a movie and you get to stay for an investigation afterwards. Yeah. So really cool stuff. And they're working to revive and sustain the theater, which is forever old. It's been in service for about 100 years, if I'm not mistaken. So, but Clifton Paranormal, Clifton 5, and it's in the town again. I'm going to say Northumberland, and that's not right. Huntington. I never get that right. Huntington, PA. So kind of center state here in Pennsylvania. So easy access from everywhere.
Yeah. So I want to give a shout out to Todd and Carmela. They were on a show last night that I caught a good bit of. So it was good hearing some of their information.
Hey guys, good evening. Welcome. Thanks for coming. All right. Well, speaking of coming, why are we here? Right.
We're here. I hope you know, Jamie.
I'm aware. I have an inkling of why we're here. So, first of all, this evening was a request, although it was already planned as well. So we just kind of bumped it up a little bit. But our dear friend Bert Lynch asked if we were asking you guys for like, what do we want to talk about? Bert brought up ley lines, and it was already on my mind. So here we are to discuss tonight what ley lines are, or maybe even aren't. So, so I guess we should dig in, right?
Yeah, probably. Yeah.
We go to the first slide. So a quick overview, quick and easy overview. Ley lines were initially discovered in the early 1920s in the United Kingdom, in England, and they are not to be confused with longitude and latitude lines, which are lines for navigation that are east, west, north, south lines that scour the globe all the way around and help us plot positions of where we are on the world, whether we're at sea or on land. There is some similarities, so I can understand there might be some confusion. And as much as these are physical things, these lines, they are also believed to be some kind of energy highway that connects big, important global monuments like Stonehenge and the pyramids of Giza. We go next slide. So these guys are very, very, very far apart. You know, one is in the northern part of England, the other in the heart of Africa in Egypt. So many, many miles between. So how can it be connected? So we'll get to that too. Let's first talk about how they were discovered. And in that, there was a gentleman, a British amateur archaeologist named Alfred Watkins, who first proposed that there were perfectly straight lines connecting key historic landmarks and sacred sites as far back in 1921. Go to the next slide. He noticed that ancient sites all around Great Britain fell into a straight alignment of perfectly straight paths. His opinion came from a combination of reviewing maps and being in field work, climbing tall hills for a better view. So, you know, you think about it, when you want to see something, you see better from the hilltops than you can from the valleys. So he took an elevation and he started to notice a lot of things. Mr. Watkins wrote a book called The Old Straight Track, which was released in 1925, where he posed that the lines represented ancient travel routes. And I'm showing you this slide, and we'll look at Mr. Watkins in a second, because the left-hand slide are Roman colonized sites in England back in the day. And they created things like roads, which the right-hand slide shows, image shows, and many of those are still in existence today. And this is not that, what we're talking about. So, you know, roads are generally, while they may be straight, they generally go around things like hills or rivers or obstacles, where ley lines are actual straight lines that, even though it's inconvenient, it will go straight over a hill or a mountain instead of around it, which will take a lot more time and or energy, or put people at risk, perhaps even for being, you know, out longer than they were intending to. So we're talking about, you know, 2,000 years ago, folks didn't have as many weapons. They may not have been traveling in larger groups as they might today. So quite an interesting thought. So next slide. And here is Mr. Watkins. And he actually wrote 3 books on ley lines. The Old Straight Track is the primary piece of work. And actually, I bought a copy of it, and it's quite an interesting read. It's a little dry, as you would imagine anybody who's an older British gentleman would be dry. But it has a lot of information in it, a lot of really cool stuff. So anybody wants to borrow it, let me know. So going back to the point. So the hills and mounds are visible at great distances and they aid in navigation. So finishing the thought on why he went up to the hilltops. And what he also found was that many hills have ancient burial mounds on their peaks, further adding to the speculation that their importance is key in connecting monuments or locations. So if you look at, you know, from one hilltop to another, why mounds are there, or even moats, areas where there was just some kind of a sacred site there, is lost to antiquity, unfortunately, for the most part, but they are prevalent on most hilltops. And again, hilltops can line up straight lines. So you can go from one monument to the other just by trekking between the 2 points. He theorized that if he started at any one point along the line and traveled along it, he would reveal unmarked historic sites within such areas as forest glades, trenches, or notches on crested hills. So even though there's a lot of overgrowth in the woods, if you're on the path, you might likely find something along the way, especially a marker that would allow you to know you're on the path. The same thing in trenches and in gullies and things like that. A lot of times they were strategically created things, a lot of times for barriers, keeping people or things away from a protected area like a farm, or notches in hillsides where there would be a resting spot to stay instead of keep climbing up over and coming down the other side. Interestingly, but unintentionally, his view echoes other alignment theories, whereas ancient humans were attuned to some ethereal force that is now unobserved by modern times, and they constructed their sacred spaces in these places where the force was the strongest. And I'm not talking about Star Wars force, right? Okay, it may be with you though. The idea of Earth energy, and we'll talk more about that in a minute. But there are areas of heightened access to that, hence the alignment part. Mr. Watkins did not believe there was any mystical or paranormal significance to the ley lines that he discovered. He just believed they were lines that denoted travel between locations or for trade or commerce. Go to the next slide. So these are some of the elevated points. Here's showing a pathway of people walking along, a nice elevated view. You think about England, it's an island in the ocean. So really what it totals out to be is a mountaintop, right? There's a lot more of it underwater than there is above. So there are going to be peaks and valleys. There are going to be mountains and mounds and hills. So lots of elevated areas. So next slide. And again. So some of these do, they look a little unusual. But like here, what would happen is the mound would, the hill mound would go up and then it would be flattened off at the top. That was almost a true tell that there was something established there that was man-made, because it should have a crown or at least a cone to it of some kind of peak. So that likely there has some element at the top of it. Next slide. And again, flat top. So the next piece of this is, how do you follow the trail, or how do you follow the path or the line? So the idea is that there were many, many marker stones along the way. And these are some examples of them. The one on the left is very large. That's got to be 10 feet, 20 feet tall. It's got some knocks made into it. So there would be perhaps something like a light or candle of some kind, or a fire built onto it so you could see it at night. On the middle side, there is just a vertical stone. And in many, many of the older towns in suburbia of the UK, marker stones are still prevalent in the towns that were built around them, because they were usually a cross point or a confluence of two mark lines coming together, and the stones would be there. And smartly, no one removed them. So they are key historical markers there still. Next slide. So Mr. Watkins created a map of the lines that he discovered. And this is it's hard to read, of course, because it's forever old, 100-year-old map at this point. But you're seeing a grid on the left-hand side. He's trying to show elevations to the center of it, and then crossover lines to connect dots of A, B, and C, and so forth. Next slide. Slightly different version of it, more of a regular map that we're familiar with, that we would have for us older fellows and ladies. The maps that we would have in our glove boxes, perhaps, back when we were driving around the world. We know people, right, Chad, who still have them in their glove boxes?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we do. Even though there's a lot of technology in their hand. And the next slide. And a little bit more of a wider view, much more line element here, showing the connectivity of how lines come off. And in this case, there's a centralized hub, which is likely a municipality of some kind, or some kind of civilized hub. Next slide. And I like this one because it's black and white. It's a lot different, but it's easier to see a little bit too. This is the Cambridge area, showing where lines the confluence of lines there. Okay.
It's interesting that they don't all come together at one point.
Right. Well, we'll get to that, a little bit of it anyway. So next slide, please. So again, The hills are everywhere. The hills are alive with the sound of music in some places of the world. Um, but here they're alive with elevations to mark views and to find. The other side of having these, yes, thanks God. Um, the really interesting thing here is that when you're in the valley, you can see hilltops rather clearly as well. So regardless of the lowness of your position in the travel that you're making, you can see the elevated areas around you rather quickly. And of course, from the elevation, you can see over the valley and into the next area or to the next elevated space as well. So hence why hills are such a valuable commodity in the idea of ley lines, because they are everywhere, first of all. And then they also have sight lines regardless of which position you're on in the track. All right, next slide. And here, just trying to show a lot of the wide open spaces as well. So this is even though it's not a crested hill, it is an elevated point, and you're seeing a lot of the tracking, walking paths going across it. This is what we would have seen back in the day for that traveler trying to make their way. All right, next slide. I got a lot of hill views, right? Yeah, I think it's the last one, at least for now. So next slide. Okay, so there are other things to consider, right? So moving ahead a little bit, so we're getting out of the 1920s and into the 1960s. And back in 1961, a gentleman named Tony Wedd, a former military pilot, suggested that ley lines were real and were used by prehistoric humans to communicate with aliens, right? And Mr. Wedd went so far as to share that the lines were paths created to guide UFOs to landing zones here on Earth. And interestingly, at least in the UK, there are higher elements of UFO sightings along ley line plots than there are in other spaces around the country. So, coincidence? Maybe. Maybe not. In 1969, a gentleman named John Mitchell introduced the concept of Earth energies in his book, The View Over Atlantis. And unfortunately, I didn't have time to get to this one, but it looks really interesting. From here, ley lines began to take on a more esoteric or spiritual connotation than being simple paths created for people to travel on. Mitchell believes that ley lines are a sort of spiritual arteries of the planet, and there's a belief that though psychic awareness or dowsing, particularly on ancient sites, is possible to sense the energies there. So you may see somebody out on the fields and up on the hills, with dowsing rods or some element of them, trying to connect to the energies. He also believes that there are people who are more in tune with the elements of the earth who have a better ability to sense these areas as well than some others do. And I think we can say that from our own experience in the paranormal field. There are some who are more in tune, have a bit of a gift, if you will, than others do, and have a different connection when investigations are underway than some others do as well. So it's kind of interesting, right? Because it all kind of ties together. It's all about energy. Next slide. So I'm trying to show the earth and the energies here. All right, next slide. So there's another gentleman, a researcher named Tom Brooks, who believes that keen mathematicians lived in Great Britain as far back as 5,000 years ago. And this would be long before the Greeks invented even geometry. And he, as he examined about 1,500 different sites on the ley lines, he found that they were built on a series of isosceles triangles and posited that once identified, each would guide a traveler to the next one. So if you remember last week, I think it was when we did the dragon
sea
triangle,
vortices.
Right, the vortices map that you shared. I was going to bring it into this as well, but I think this one's a little better to that. If you look at this, and this is obviously a wide out view, but you can start to see the lines that are crisscrossing here. At some point, these are going to crisscross enough to form triangles. And hence, whether they're isosceles or any other style of triangle, you can start to see patterns and almost grids the same way that you were showing in that map last week. So I thought that was really an interesting point to bring up. Next slide. Okay. So going outside of Great Britain, you're going to get a global perspective. There are theorists that have hypothesized that ley lines crisscross the entire globe like longitudinal and latitudinal lines do. The Incan Empire in Peru was dissected by ritual pathways called seclus, which radiated from Cusco to the outer edges of the kingdom. Along these straight lines, the Incas placed ceremonial markers called huacas to denote the pathway. So very much a marker stone was every so much in the distance. So you're nearer on the path. Not unusual for us if we're out in the woods, we've got either flags or spray paint on trees. That marker is to let you know you're on the right path. And they were doing the same thing. Now, this is long before we were there as Europeans coming and doing the conquest, the unfortunate conquest that we did, looking for gold. Here the Incas are thriving and doing a very similar system that was occurring in Europe at or around the same time. Further, the ancient Chinese art of Feng Shui arranges landscape features to ensure a harmonious flow of the universal energy called Qi. That's spelled Qi, and I hope I said that right because that's what I believe, but Qi. Some argue that this is related to the natural earth energies of ley lines that are crisscrossing the world. So that draw is allowing for symmetry and therefore creating harmony in nature. All right, so a lot of good stuff, right? So next slide. We have to take all of the possibles, right? And then there's always going to be a negative. And I think all of these are, well, maybe the UFO thing, maybe not. But I think so far, everything is at least somewhat plausible to say this could be what's happening. So there are naysayers. And to point that, back in 1980, Tom Williamson and Liz Bellamy tried to approach ley lines with a more scientific mindset. And ultimately, they found a potential error in Watkins' theory. Upon reviewing the locations of landmarks believed to be connected by ley lines, they found that there were so many sites in Great Britain that it was possible to draw a straight line in any direction and literally connect the dots. So showing here, lots of, especially the middle section, we've all played that grid connect the dot game where we're making squares and putting our initials in it. The idea of that is that you have enough plot points, you can make things be what you want to see. And not sure you can see this, but my favorite thing in all of this that I found is that bottom right one where there's information or all the dots. But when you connect dots, you get knowledge. I think that might be a Christmas card or something coming up for somebody. I don't know. Love that graphic.
Yeah.
But the idea that when you overlay all of the stuff down and you start just putting lines to points, eventually stuff is going to make a pattern. It's going to, it's natural progression. And we as humans, our brains are triggered to find patterns. We don't like odd things. And hence, with this, it might not be as deep as Mr. Watkins was originally presenting. Okay, next slide. So in my research, I found a few things. The ley lines carry, this is the metaphysical side of it. Ley lines carry rivers of supernatural energy that pulls in concentrated energy at places where the lines intersect, the crossovers, right? That two different, it's like anytime. I think you and I have both been in Pittsburgh enough. We've stood at Point Park and watched the rivers connect, and the creation of the Ohio. There's two different colors of water coming together to create a new river,
Right.
And anybody's ever been to Harper's Ferry, West Virginia, the same thing. The Shenandoah and the Potomac come together. Brown water on one side, clear water on the other, it merges. You got a different direction of water going in the river. The idea would be the same. Another theory, the Earth's core contains energy that is released in random intervals to the surface that, if visible to the naked eye, would look a lot like a Tesla coil or a plasma ball. And I like that idea, kind of because I can visualize that, but energy is coming out, touching at various points. Probably drawn to those points because anytime you would touch a plasma ball, you would get the electrical line coming to your fingertips. Of course, you wouldn't get hurt by it. Right. Neither would the person on the surface, and this would likely be more of an in-tune person, perhaps, or a key site that has some sacred or intricate value to say this is that location where the energy would come to. And lastly, it is believed that certain persons can carry and harness the energy at the intersections. So again, a person would be the lightning rod, if you will, to bring that energy to the surface. If you ever want to go down the ultimate rabbit trail, um, I suggest typing in ley lines on Reddit.
Okay.
Yeah, man, I had to stop, and they kept getting weirder and deeper and interesting all along.
Right.
But man, there's just page after page after page. So, and I'm sure it's the same for any other topic out there. But once you give folks an open forum, they're going to tell you what they think. So it was quite interesting.
Hmm.
So, in a sort of wrap up, I've said a lot of stuff here, right? And not even touching really on the global perspective, because ley lines really are a genuine thing to the UK as far as a home and the ultimate source form for it. Um, it's interesting to me, a couple things, that ancient societies could have been more in tune with the power or energy running through the natural landscapes than we are now, right? And a couple reasons likely. One is they didn't have the distractions that we have now, the technology, the pace and bustle of lifestyles today. There was time to truly be in tune with nature, because you had to be. If you saw clouds coming, you knew there was going to be a storm, so you had to find shelter. If
Right.
you were out in the the wide open spaces and it was a hot day, you knew you're going to have to find water or have water with you. There's a lot of things you had to find food. The resources that you needed to connect to nature for, whether it be a growth, plant based situation, or you had to go hunting. Um, so part of that. There are still, considering that there are still marker stones in the town center of many rural villages in the UK. It's hard to believe that many of the roads that are coming through these towns are not the basis for the original ley lines that would have been the pathways built by the individuals that Mr. Watkins spoke of. Town squares are usually crossroads, right? Main Street crosses over with the other. Here in our area, we at Lancaster City, we have King and Queen crossing. They're both prominent names. There's a town square with a statue. In our case, not a marker stone, but they're also route lines crossing usually. So I think that's an interesting thing, that we could still be looking at the ley lines that were there back in the day, but they're now paved spaces instead. And as for the actual ley line connection, I think if you were given enough information or data, data can be skewed, right? The old adage is data don't lie unless you want it to. So we present information the way we want it to be seen by the person we're presenting it to. And I'm gonna say this from a different perspective. I came from the nonprofit world, and data is the key to showing outcomes, right? You want to project what you do and how much impact it's making. So because you want donors to give to you, so you have a data set for those donors. You have a different data set for the people who are then funding you, depending on where they are. If they need outcomes, you have to present information on the validity of your program and the resource you're providing. So you want to make sure the money is being well spent. So to that point, and to take a slightly British term and say this is a bit of a cheeky turn on some information, back in 2008, there was a gentleman named Matt Parker from the University of London School of Mathematics who presented a fake ley lines map that connected in the city of Birmingham in England, the Woolworth department stores that were there. And there were many of them. It's like the Walmart of the UK, Woolworth. And for me, Woolworth is a dear thing because it was around here when we were growing up.
Mm-hmm.
But what he found, when he selected the key information he wanted to present, there were 3 specific locations that plotted to an equilateral triangle. And he posited that if you only select certain data elements, the outcome can be directed to whatever you intend it to be. Hence, he's throwing cold water on Watkins' theory that ley lines are these key pathways of intersections. Sometimes it's just random points. And again, it reminds me that data don't lie unless you want it to. So I'm personally not going to say that I don't believe Mr. Watkins, because I think he was onto something that he truly believed in. And what he found was real, because there are points in, the plot lines are points that are existing, and they are older than time in some cases for us to have recordings of history on. And to refine those places is overly important, because it helps us understand our ancestors and our past and the people who came before us. But when you try to find, if you try to over connect things, it's not Thanks, Tim. That's a true story. We all use data, by the way. So what's that say? Um, I still find it, anytime we get all you need are there's two data points to connect lines with. So, realistically, yeah, he's not off the base. Whether it's as significant as proclaimed, I don't know yet. I still don't know. But what it really was meant to be back then was, he was just trying to show that this is how people traveled and migrated and moved. And he had no idea of the metaphysical or the potential energies, connection, any of that stuff. He was pretty basic with it. And I think we've all gone a lot further with it than that. And that's usually how things go, right? Mm-hmm. So I've said a lot of stuff to say this. I still have some questions. And if there was a time when ancient humans could tap into the Earth's metaphysical energy, how was that ability lost to us, right? At least on the whole. I still believe, and I think we all know people who can connect better or differently than most. And is that a genetic thing? Is that an opportunity thing? I don't know. Is it just they have better attunement? I don't know. But I find it curious that we've lost that, if it is a thing.
Okay, I want to come back to that when you wrap up then, James.
Right. Only a few things left.
Yep.
Why were the pathways perfectly straight, even when obstacles such as steep hills were in the way? It certainly would have been easier to travel around the obstruction than it would have been, but it would have added time and potential danger, because they're more out in the exposed world more than they would have been safe in their homes or their village or behind something. So it goes both ways, but they are literally climbing straight over things. And, we don't do that with roads. We don't do we do in some cases with tunnels, of course. But even there, the tunnels aren't necessary. They're getting to the easiest place to go through the obstacle than it is to go straight through it from the biggest point where it might be on the straight path.
Right.
If ley lines are unique to England, how do you explain the Incas doing the same many thousands of miles away before having contact with Europeans? And here we go again, right? Aliens, right? It's got to be. That's how the pyramids got built. So I'm joking to say that, of course, but. Yeah. And lastly, if using ley lines to travel between prehistoric places, how many more undiscovered? If using ley lines to travel between key prehistoric places, how many more undiscovered locations could there be now in the world? And how many marker stones were removed due to progress along the way? How many things were covered over and built over along the way? And how many pathways have been lost this way? I'm leaving this slide for last on purpose. This is not necessarily a pathway as it is a road, but the ancient Romans were coming in and building stone roads, and that was a key thing in Europe at the time. It goes through most of Europe. At some point or another, there were stone roads utilizing a clear denoted pathway or travel zone. It also made not having to walk through thickets like this where there could be a predator available, made things just a lot simpler, but not necessarily ones that were traveling on ley lines. So that is what I have, sir. All right. So metaphysical stuff. Right?
So
what do you got?
Well, first I want to go back to some comments. I didn't want to keep throwing comments up. So Bert's was the first comment when we were talking about the hills. So maybe the hilltops were thought to get closer to whatever god they were worshiping.
Of course, and that's the burial mounds are all being on hilltops are a couple things too. They're harder to get to. So even if there were a way to desecrate the site, it would be harder to get to for somebody or something. And again, elevation closer to God, absolutely. So it has a spiritual connotation. I like that.
Then let's see. Todd had a question about any information about how far apart the markers were, mounds, and if there was any significance in the spacing that you found.
I haven't seen anything to say that there was a distinct metric of distance between. In most cases, they were natural stones found in the area that were either on the line, luckily, or brought in. So the ones that had to be moved certainly weren't going to roll boulders into places. So a lot of times they're very small, simple ones that are, only maybe a meter or so tall, or less, that had notches or some kind of something chiseled to it, or not, carved into it. These are not ornate things by any means, and that's also why people dismiss them, because it could just be a rock, right? Although a rock that has been worked has a greater tendency to be something of significance, because people just, no one did graffiti back then, right? Like we do these days.
Right.
So there was one, and a lot of them actually, the larger ones, are flat topped. So which is curious, because a lot of mounds are flat topped as well. So hence the belief that they are following to that next place. Not natural to find rocks that are just perfectly flat. Nature doesn't do straight lines very much or very well. So part of that is that as well.
Okay. And then the next comment was, any documentations on individuals or societies using any of the energy associated with the ley lines?
Well, to be honest with you guys, I didn't go that far. And that's a whole nother episode probably, right?
Right.
In the sense of societies and or organizations or belief sections or sects even. I try to stay away from it, just because I didn't want to get too deep into that end of it. I'm sure there are, very much like there are elements and groups of faith. Faith doesn't necessarily have to be religion, but belief groups, for all kinds of things. So I would have to imagine, yes, there should be somewhere in the world, if not many.
Okay. And then this one sort of is how I look at things. I didn't realize there were paths, so
Yeah.
that was a learning experience for me. I looked at. I always thought they were the energy points connecting the different historical sites. So
Well,
I
well, here
found
we
it
go. Right.
interesting.
This is where the origin expands to something else. So I'm trying to talk about the origin of ley lines, and again, Alfred Watkins finding this extraordinary coincidence at first, and then realizing he had something more. Being a physical thing, and then energy is, well, real, is not a physical thing like a line on a road, or a path on the ground. So people took it further, as often happens with everything. So it went from being a geology survey to becoming a metaphysical survey or belief. So I don't discredit that that's possible by any means. I'm obviously, I hate to say this, I haven't been to England to see these lines myself. Someday, hopefully, and Bert, on your next trip over, I think you got some homework. But this is, it's not out of the realm of possibility that there is energy here. I certainly won't discredit it, but as it was presented originally in back in 1925 with the old Straight Track, this wonderful book, it's not that at all.
Right. So one of my thoughts here is, it would be interesting to dig into some of the things in the Americas, the Native American
Mhm.
pathways, and see if we have the same thing that we don't really understand yet. You
Right.
said we have it within what, Central America with the Incas.
Yep. Well,
Um,
specifically in a mapped plan, and most of their cities were built on grids as well. And if you travel here, even here in the U.S., the East Coast is the landing spot for everybody coming from Europe, right? And we
right.
got off the boats and we started building things, and we had no plan, because we just wanted to get off the boat and build things, and
Hmm.
not be on a boat for another 3 months, right? So,
Understandably.
right, and I don't blame them, right? So, and you just need to get away from everybody else on the boat. Um, so you look at the East Coast, and everything's kind of tight and jumbled together. As you start to get into the Midwest, it gets lighter and looser, and as you get to the West, it's planned,
Hmm.
because we had time to figure it out by the time we got there.
Right.
And I went to school, I went to college in Albuquerque, and the city is built on a grid. And I'd never seen anything like that until I got there. And you knew exactly where you were in the city by what street you were on, because it was named southeast, northeast, northwest, southwest. So you knew what part of the city you were in, at least. It's not that big a place. I mean, it's a big city, but it's not that big.
Right.
But it was designed intentionally, and routes 10 and 25, or 40 and 25, I'm sorry, intersect there. So that's the quadrant connect. That's the lines for the quadrants. Um, so, you know, in the sense of, you know, the sense of scale, you know, we literally could, and I'm sure it's out there. You know, we find a map of key historic places here in the U.S., especially for Native Americans. You know, as there are many, many more than there are for white folks at this point because of history and time.
Hmm.
Then you could literally connect those same dots, and that's kind of the problem, if you will, because again, all you need to connect lines are two dots or two plot points,
Right.
right? So theoretically, if you find a burial mound here, and we know where there's one in West Virginia, right, in
Yep.
Moundsville, um, right across the street from West Virginia Penitentiary. We've all seen it. Those who've been there, we've all seen it and stood there like, wow, that's really cool. You know, but you could take that line and connect it to a line on the other side of the Ohio, perhaps another site, and all of a sudden now we've got a ley line. By definition, what ley lines really are, lines that connect locations. So, you know, I'm sure that people have traveled because again, it's a viewable point. So you have a place to go to from wherever you are. See, I think so, and I do think you could do that anywhere in the world because you know, we as humans have been around for a very, very long time, and we have therefore key locations that are near to us and dear to us as sacred sites or ceremonial locations, or even just dense population density locations, you know, civilized locations. Sure.
Todd's coming here about, you know, I agree. Some of these seem like some references
Wow.
would come up on Oak Island,
Yeah.
and how things are connected from Europe to that island, and just it's fascinating. Um,
Oh, sure.
so
You know, I came across a little bit of information because we're dealing with the UK on, and I'm going to say this wrong, I believe, but uh, Rosalind Chapel in Scotland, um, and how that is because it is a, you know, key historic site. It's a place of worship. And another interesting thing too, a lot of churches are on the ley lines in the UK. Um,
yeah, that is
marker
interesting.
stones are found somewhere on the church property. So, you know, again, belief that that was a sacred site, and the churches, of course, became churches by the fact that we learned how to build things versus
Right.
just being out in the open. But the marker stones would have been there to let you know you're at the place, or you're at
Right.
least on the path to the place. So, but there, you know, Rosamond is, there's a line showing, you know, connections out of it on a map, and it's like, well, there it is. That makes
Hmm.
sense. You know, that's a key sacred site
Hmm.
that's been built
So
up over time.
so back to your point about, were people more connected to the metaphysical, the spiritual? That I think as time has gone on, we were we were very grounded to the earth on a daily basis before we got into the Roman culture. The you know as cultures advanced and we became more industrialized, even back in Roman days, like with roads and we I think that's when we started losing that connection to Mother Earth in the
Yep.
spiritual side of things. And luckily, some people have been able to keep that grounding, or that whatever that connection is, or figured out how to develop it. I mean, you know, with the kids, they're playing on a phone every day. There's no way they're going to make that connection,
I think of that. I thought about this the whole way through. Honestly, you
because
know,
it's like
yeah,
their connection is that visual stimulation that they need from
yeah.
their phone, whereas there are people who can get that stimulation from the energy in the earth.
Yeah. Well, you know,
And
a natural high, the dopamine that's provided by the screen is to go out and sit in the sunlight, you
right.
know, indirect sun. You know, as pale as the kids are, they're probably just going to burst into flames, but whatever. Um, you know,
Yeah.
I'm with them on that.
Right.
There's parts of me I haven't seen sun in like 35 years.
So yeah,
But you know, it is that simple to some degree, but it's also that hard to put the device away
right.
and you know, to turn that, to flip that switch. You know,
Hmm.
that's that we're moving more away and
Right.
further all the time,
I
you
mean,
know, to that point.
meditation used to be a part of it was part of life because you
Yep.
didn't have a choice. You know what I mean? Like it was something you didn't have another stimulation, so that meditation gave you that stimulation
Yes.
and
Exactly.
connectivity. And like you know, I have a really hard time getting in that state to meditate. I'm the guy I was talking about earlier with John Stillman, the
Mhm.
psychic medium I went to. He said he is the worst at meditation, but he still figured out how to make that connection. So there's hope for all of us, Jamie. So now, now
Well, but you know, that again, we'll go back to that is the hardest thing to do, is to disconnect and to
mhm,
be at peace with yourself. You know, because we are now conditioned to be engaged in something
right.
and on at all times. You know, and to literally pull that plug is a very scary thing. You know, we don't know how to anymore. Yep, exactly. You know, one of my favorite things to do, is, like in the summers, is we try to, we have failed last year to do so, but take a vacation to Vermont, and get out in the woods
Hmm.
and get away. Others, it's the beach, to be
Right.
out in the sun and have the ocean and the waves and all that stuff. To me, that's too many people. There's distractions. I, I,
Right.
I I love to be out in the woods and just be quiet and listen to what's happening. Except for that damn owl we had the last time, was hooting all night.
Well, it's like we
Whew.
were talking a couple
But
weeks ago when I lost power and I wasn't sure if we was going to be able to do the show, but
right,
just
calm it was.
how
Right.
calm it was, and how walking outside and no light, like the neighborhood was dark.
Yeah.
So the only light I had was the light that I had walking the dog to make sure I could see.
So how
Because
did, how did you feel at that point?
I had two feelings. I had a feeling of calmness and relaxation, but there was also a very uneasy feeling of
Yep.
I'm missing something. Like what am I missing? Um, so
So
yeah,
as a paranormal investigator, right, we walk around in the dark a lot with very low light or no light at all. And I joke, here at our house, that everybody seems to be afraid of the dark because they're leaving all the damn lights on. Um, and I'm like, and I get chided for turning all the lights off. But again, I walk around in the dark all the time,
right. Hmm.
and I find comfort in that and calmness in that. But when every light is out everywhere, it's a little off-putting
Yeah,
because we're not used to that. We're used to
yeah.
some ambient somewhere, a street light, a neighbor's porch light, or
Well,
something,
even
a
our
night
all our
light.
electronic all our electronics
Yeah,
have a glow, and it's like
yes. And they all have a
you know
flashlight.
you wake up in the middle of the night and the blue light on the Wi-Fi thing
Yep.
lights up the room, and
Sure.
you're not realizing
Your
it. So.
digital clock is shining.
Hmm. Uh,
Absolutely.
Tim, you make a good point because I noticed that too. Like when the refrigerator's off and the furnace is off, like
Yeah.
it's silent and it's deafening, and
Yeah.
I wish I
Well, if
could
I
just turn
if,
everything off sometimes.
if I recall correctly, that your power outage was due to a rain, like a storm, right?
Yeah. Hmm.
So, and that's the other thing. You don't when everything's on, you don't hear the rain at all.
Right.
The TV's on, the devices are running, whatever it is, the background din of the home, everything's happening. You don't always hear rain,
Hmm.
and that's another calming experience. That's why sound machines have rain. You know,
Hmm.
it is that factor, and it's a natural thing. Of course, it doesn't happen every day. Well, hopefully, it doesn't happen every day. But in that, that's why that's projected to us, because it is something that helps us calm.
Hmm. Yeah, Amanda, this is something that I've read a lot about, and it is very healthy. And they actually suggest if you can get out even for 5 minutes a day in a backyard where it's grassy to walk around in your bare feet, it is one of the healthiest things you can do for yourself.
It's a great idea. I love it. And we're always on the go, right? So we don't have time to disconnect like that. So two things. One is obviously the connection to nature, but it also makes us pause for a moment. And being barefoot is being vulnerable,
Hmm.
right? As well. I understand, sir. I understand. Here for me also, right about now, everybody's gone to bed, or at least on their way. And this 9 o'clock start is a little late for some, but
Me,
for us, yeah, me too. Well, technically, me too. I got to get up super early, but I'm going to take the time once this is done just to go sit for a little while before I go to bed, just to wind this down and process this out for me. I do this at your episode hosting, mine hosting. It doesn't matter. But that calmness of having everybody else away, where they're supposed to be too, knowing there's safety and security. Everybody's tucked in, if you will. That helps me calm down my day and move on to get to sleep. So,
Yep.
And mine are too. And it's interesting. I can hear, as quiet as the Amish are, they sure are loud at 3:30 in the morning when they're heading off to market. So it's a lot clumping and clopping going by my house as well. So, well, this turned different, didn't it? Just a little bit, anyway. Excuse me.
But again, it's connected. I mean,
yeah. Well, there is energy all around us, and whether they're in the ley lines or whether they're in nature itself or whether it's in us, or the spirits that are around us, I think that, we don't stop to pause enough to connect to it, whatever it is. And it may not be a lot for some, it may be overwhelming for others, but whatever it is, we got to find time to take care of that. And that's important to us because that is part of us as nature, or the nature of us.
There's sort of going off topic, sort of not. Well, I'll throw it out there. There's this belief that there are what's called lampposts in the world for the spiritual world. There was actually, I have a close friend who really believes that there's one at the Fulton Opera House in Lancaster, and that is, there's a lot of spirits that come and go from there because of that. She could actually see spirits, very, very openly see stuff. And one day she was working, and it was like all of a sudden the spirit popped in because it was drawn to this lamppost and was like, "What the heck am I doing here?" And that quickly popped back out.
Wow!
But it was just, it's that whole, is that another type of energy point? Is it tied? Is that, is the Fulton on a ley line maybe? Like,
it's worth investigating.
Yeah. So
that's kind of the problem, right? And this goes back to the East Coast concept of we just kind of built stuff on top of stuff. And Europe's the same way. I mean, there's only so much space. So there's buildings on top of buildings on top of buildings. So I love this, Tim. Thank you. As long as there's a 3-prong, you're good. The idea that there could have been something here in Lancaster where the Fulton sits, prior, that could have been something that is that exact lamppost of some kind of historical significance or sacred significance to the native population that clearly was here long before us. Certainly is interesting. And here's another one. Yeah, absolutely. This is not new information. I've been hearing that for decades.
Yep. Here's another good point.
Well, it's an interesting point.
I mean, we are creating ley lines between these towers, like so.
Yep. And for the energy segment of it, for sure. Towers are plot points, though, right? Tower exists somewhere. It's a physical structure, so therefore you can connect that to another one via a line. There we go.
It's funny. I was actually reading an article earlier this week about the first microwave towers that AT&T put up that created the first wireless network years ago, and that these towers are finally being retired, but they're still out there, and they, it created these lines. So,
well, there's a lot of houses that still have UHF antennas on them too, right? So that connectivity thing and energy being transferred or received, at least, it's picking up a signal from somewhere, whether it's being used or not. Those signals are still being presented too.
Yeah.
Because there's a great grandma or grandma out there somewhere who doesn't want to pay for cable. So I don't blame them.
They're getting fewer and far between, but
they are.
So.
They are, and the receivers are still around. So it's quite interesting. And there is still a Radio Shack in New Holland, so we can get them.
Well, Jamie, I have to tell you, this has been really interesting, and I've learned a lot from today's episode. So thank you for a good job. Nice job on the research.
And thanks everybody for your input as well.
So I love it when we have this much discussion on a show.
Yeah,
It's
me too.
so. Should we jump into what's coming up?
Yeah, we got stuff, right? So
Yeah.
right ahead.
Let's see. Sorry, I was looking at the next comment that's coming up. Upcoming Jott-Nyx events. February 24th. We're not even into February yet, but the investigation is sold out for the 24th. It doesn't mean there might not be tickets at the door. I'm not making promises, but
Right.
you know,
And we can usually squeeze a few more in,
so
but it has to be. There's no advanced ticket purchase. You have to show up that evening and go to the check-in table or the counter at the brewery.
mhm. But then there's plenty of other events coming up. We're going to throw out our May 11th event again at Red Mill. It's going to be a great time. I know Ron and Lourdes are looking forward to it. So, you know,
Yeah.
definitely tickets for that are available on our Facebook page. Everything else is available at boobiesbrewery.com. Our upcoming episodes next week is John Covey. He's a psychic medium, fairly young. He's in his early 20s, Jamie.
Okay.
But actually fairly well known in the community, very respected. So I'm really looking forward to a conversation with John. Then after the week after that, you're doing Champ.
Yep.
Champ. No.
Kind of champ, but whatever.
Yeah, okay.
Same thing.
I mean, it's right after the Super Bowl, so anyway.
Someone will be a champ.
The week after that is President's Week, for celebrating the president's birthday. So I thought we'd jump into Hauntings of the White House.
Yep.
And then I can never say this right. Wendigo. Okay.
Keep trying now. I'm loving it.
I got to make you laugh somehow. So
say it again.
Yeah, no.
And we might, depending on how something else plays out, we might bump that back a little bit.
Okay.
So I have another thought that we might have a guest that I did not think to talk to you about prior to this episode.
Okay. Yeah, that's all right.
But something we've discussed, you and I have discussed already. So
Okay.
that's in the window of when that person is available. So
Okay.
we'll see. More to come. That's where we are with Wendigo, which is a Native American folklore / cryptid / maybe monster. So more to come.
There's another question here for you.
Yeah. So you can go to Google Maps and type in Ley Lines, and you'll actually start to see stuff there. And you can certainly Google Ley Lines, and you'll come across many maps, which I don't know that they're truly real or not. So don't buy anything. Okay. But yeah, definitely. And, some of the stuff that you've seen in these graphics came from Google Images. So nothing too deep, nothing too complex, but you can find stuff on a relatively simple search or an easy search. Well, thanks, Todd and Carmela. We appreciate you being here. Thanks so much.
Jamie, we need to get together with Todd and Carmela at some point. Some of the stuff that I saw them on the show last night, they have some great Polaroid stuff.
Ooh.
From, I believe, the Ritz Theater somewhere in Jersey, and some EVPs to go with it. And it was I was intrigued. So I'd love to get together with these guys and do some investigating.
Absolutely. Well, we loved to investigate, so so let's figure it out.
I mean, and Bert's got a place that we should go.
Yeah, I have a friend who was there recently for a tour with his family, and he actually got to meet the president. So I feel like I got an in, right, with somebody.
Yeah. Can you get that lined up, Jamie?
I'll work on it. No promises though. We may have to buy a ticket to get in. That's how it works in every movie, right? You buy a ticket to get in, and then you just drift off to the side.
Right.
So
I don't think it works that way.
Do you think we can get a couple K2s through security?
Yeah, I think this sums that up.
Probably not. And I'm going to say this: we're both too pretty for jail, so I'm not risking it.
last bit of business. Here's how to find us on social media. You found us on Facebook or YouTube. We're getting a couple YouTube followers now, Jamie. I don't know if you noticed that, but if the chats have the little red on it, it's a YouTube person.
Somebody's watching us on the YouTube.
Yeah.
Oh, I make myself laugh. That's all that matters.
Check out our TikTok, Instagram. You know.
Yep. Give us a like. Give us a follow.
Yeah.
More good stuff coming your way.
Yep. Reach out to us if you have ideas for shows. Like I said, this one was
dedicated to Bert.
But Bert wanted more information.
Yep.
So, and my dog's coming running down the steps, so she may make an appearance.
Hey, Maggie.
So we'll see. Anyway, anything else, Jamie?
Well, I've said enough. So, I don't know if you guys all watch Saturday Night Live or not. But this week,
that time.
Well, you can watch it on demand, Chad. Late for everybody, right? This week, the musical guest was Justin Timberlake. Okay. And they had a bit with him and Jimmy Fallon coming back doing the Barry Gibb talk show, which is hysterical. And when they do these bits and they dress up like Barry and Robin Gibb, and Justin Timberlake is Robin Gibb, who's the silent one. And they always ask him, do you have anything to add? And he's like, he always ponders and he goes, no, I don't. So that's my answer to your question. No, I don't.
All right.
So good stuff. It's out there. Go find it. It's hysterical. You'll love it.
Okay. So, well, I want to thank everybody for tuning in tonight. Thank you, Jamie. Great job on the show tonight. You'll find us here next Tuesday.
Yeah.
So, with that, I think we can wrap it up and say good night and have a great week.
Yep. Thanks, everybody. Good night.
Night.